Hello, this film's about writing better conclusions and recommendations. This is especially important if you're writing a research project or perhaps you're writing a report because your professors or teachers have asked you to do so at school or at UK university. So, what are these things? What are conclusions and recommendations? Well, in your writing, conclusions are the final statements, the ending, really, that summarize the key findings of your research study. So, when you've been doing some research, you will be usually required to make some conclusions. Else, what's the point of doing the research? What have you found out? What's important here? What needs to happen as a result of what you've done. So, your conclusions should be based on clear evidence that you've presented before in the research. So, if you're writing a report, the conclusions usually come towards the end after you've analyzed the data and discussed what you found in that data. So, your conclusions should therefore be very clear and they should clearly answer the research questions that you started with when you started your research project. So you might have a hypothesis or you might have a question, the aim of the research that you're trying to achieve by the end, and your conclusions link back to your aim or your hypothesis of your research and answer those questions. The recommendations are different because they come usually after the conclusions. So the conclusions are all about the data and what you found and what you can discuss based on the evidence of that data. Recommendations are the next step, and they're the ideas that you have that are drawn from the conclusions that help people make better the current situation. So they are suggestions or proposals that are based on what you've discussed in the conclusions that have been drawn from the research. So they're a continuation of the story of your research report. So they often outline the potential courses of action or improvements or ideas for future research that you have as a result of your conclusions. So, conclusions, like I said, summarize the key findings of your research. So, you'll present the most important and most relevant results from your study. Not all the details again, because you've already discussed that in the analysis of your data in your report previously. The conclusions just pick out the highlights, the key findings, and they link very clearly to and directly to your research aims and objectives. They have to address those research aims and objectives. Else, what's the point of doing your research? So, you might have to do a literature review. So, in your conclusions, you can compare what you found from your original data. Some people call that the primary data. And in your conclusions, compare what you found, the highlights of that data analysis, with what's already been written about your subject in the existing literature. So, highlight the unique contributions of your study and how it pushes the field of knowledge forwards. So, you're going to summarize the main points. Tell us the most important things you've learned from the research that you've undertaken and connect your questions. So, make sure your conclusions connect and answer to the questions you asked at the beginning of your research. And compare your research with other relevant research. Talk about how your findings are similar or different to what other people have found out and have published in the relevant scientific or other relevant articles or reports that you've found in your literature review. And be honest. Be honest about what you found and really what you don't know. If there are things you couldn't figure out, be open about it because that shows confidence in what you've done and it won't trip you up. If somebody comes along, like your professor or your teacher, and asks you about your conclusions and later on about your recommendations, and you haven't been particularly honest about it, then they might start asking you about things that you really don't know the answer to. So acknowledge your limitations and the study's limitations as a result. So perhaps you ran out of time. Perhaps you didn't think about something that you really, upon reflection, should have done. The recommendations then are a prioritized kind of list of things that are impactful and feasible ideas to improve the current situation. So your recommendations should be prioritized with the most impactful and the most feasible, the easiest to do in terms of your recommendations first, going down the list, becoming less and less attractive. So you focus upon the most important things and tell us what you think should be done next. And be specific, be clear and helpful in your advice. And think about the future. Discuss how your ideas can be used in the future. What are the benefits of following through with your ideas? But also, what are the challenges? What are the negative consequences? What are the problems that might happen when you try to put your ideas into action? What sort of costs will there be? Not just financial costs, but perhaps time, perhaps other resources. What about the sustainability of your recommendations? How your recommendations can be implemented and maintained in a sustainable way is important to at least briefly discuss in your list of recommendations. And so, like I say, address the limitations, just like in your conclusions. Your recommendations may have limitations that have affected the feasibility of them. So, for example, if they're really expensive to put in place, or the company that you've written the report for simply doesn't have enough staff trained in that particular area to follow through upon your ideas. So, recommendations, they're more than just a shopping list. They should be more than just bullet points in a random sort of list that you thought of. They should be prioritized, well thought out, discussing both the pros, the advantages, and the cons, the disadvantages, the negatives of your own ideas, and really highlighting the limitations and thinking about the sustainability of your own ideas into the future. Those will be really useful recommendations for the readers of your work. So I would say when you're writing your conclusions and recommendations, avoid difficult, complex language. Keep it simple. Simple words, simple sentences that are appropriate to your audience. Think about who you're writing for. Make sure your ideas are relevant to them. And give examples. Use real life situations to explain your ideas and the consequences, both positive and negative, of your own critically thought about recommendations. And make sure that they're organized, like I say, in priority in terms of impact, but make sure your conclusions and recommendations are easy to follow in their organization as well. Hopefully you find that useful. So thanks very much for watching. If you like, give me a thumbs up, like the film, and subscribe to my channel to find out more and be on the ball when any new films come out, which they will soon. Okay, thanks very much. Bye now.